we had some of our landowners who are participating in range rider programs, being called wolf lovers or wolf kissers by their neighbors. In some communities, that's not seen as a positive thing, and that's uncomfortable.
Hey there, listeners. Today, we've got a bonus episode for you from the International Wolf Symposium a couple weeks back. On Land's editor and my boss, Louis Wertz, was there with our colleague Matthew Collins, who's an associate with Western Landowners Alliance's Working Wild Challenge program. Before Matt joined WLA, he conducted some really interesting research into how local groups called place-based collaboratives helped improve adoption of practices that reduce conflict between livestock and large carnivores. In this episode, we're sharing Matt's whirlwind 15-minute presentation of his research to a packed room during the International Wolf Symposium. Matt's talk stands well on its own, but you can also dig into his PowerPoint presentation in the show notes. So here's Matt Collins with Western Landowners Alliance. Cheers.
Just to give you a little view of what we'll be covering in this presentation, I'm going to talk about place-based collaborative groups and their relationship with carnivore livestock conflict reduction. I'm also going to be going into research about collective factors driving success of these groups, and don't worry, I'll go into what collective factors are. And then I'm going into a case study of the birth of a collaborative group to kind of ground this in some on-the-ground work, and then I'll go through some conclusions. So linking populations of carnivores through human-dominated landscapes is important to recovery goals. Yet, when carnivores move across human-dominated landscapes, conflicts arise. Working wild landscapes offer the most opportunity for connection, and they're the most threatened. And what I mean by working wild landscapes are where working lands and ranches overlap with prime wildlife habitat. In a lot of the American West, that's the case for a lot of private lands. And so these working wild landscapes are threatened by a host of challenges, whether it's aridification, predation, market pressures that threaten forfeit of family ranches to development. So in this sense, agriculture is part of the solution. So what I mean when I say place-based collaboratives, you're likely familiar with groups like the Blackfoot Challenge or the Wood River Wolf Project, somebody will be presenting next, or other groups in the Northern or Southern Rockies. These groups have worked at community levels to address challenges to the landscape, whether that be weeds, water, or wildlife. And they bring together diverse stakeholders to achieve common goals and common interests. These groups are excellent for coordinating community scale work necessary to address these issues and are a natural home to coordinate conflict reduction work alongside wildlife management agencies, as well as advocate for community needs. Just for instance, Montana's Blackfoot Challenge is an example of a collaborative group that's been particularly effective at reducing conflict. So this program has helped to keep wolf depredations at 3 a year as the number of packs expanded from 1 to 12 over a 10-year period. And as a number of these collaborative groups for minimizing human-carnivore conflict have increased throughout the world and the West, there's a growing body of literature that has begun assessing the components of these collaboratives that are critical for reducing conflict and achieving positive social outcomes. But these previous studies have looked at specific tools. So whether it's livestock guardian dogs, flaggery, different fencing scenarios, carcass collection, these specific tools that help to prevent conflict on individual properties or in singular specific programs. And there's a research gap identified in how collective action informs implementation of conflict prevention. And so what I mean by collective action, so this is coordinated efforts among a group of individuals. And this can be influenced by social norms or these really powerful group level influences on individual behavior. So if say 80 of you stood up right now, the other 20 will look around and be like, hey, I should probably stand up right now because we're just social creatures. Also social capital, basically the strength of the network around you, and collective efficacy or the group's ability or the group's confidence in themselves to achieve an outcome. And so, for example, studies on invasive species management have found that residents' willingness to participate in coordinated control efforts at community scales is not only influenced by their knowledge and perception of risk, but also by their perceptions of social norms, what others are doing, social capital, and collective efficacy. But few studies have kind of looked at how these affect the uptake of conflict prevention, and specifically at community scales. So just to go a little bit more into collective action, Implementation of conflict prevention tools on a single property creates a collective action problem. So practices such as fencing and livestock guardian dogs push carnivore activity or can push carnivore activity from one property to another, creating a spillover effect and depredation. And so this can have an individual benefit, but not a collective benefit if only established on one property. But this requires participation of a certain threshold of landowners to achieve an environmental public good for an entire community rather than an individual. So an example of this is a conflict prevention tool such as carcass collection. So this reduces carnivore attractants through removing cattle carcasses from the landscape. It's most effective when used by a plurality of landowners versus just 1, 2, or 3 people. So these inform the questions, how do collaboratives form and reduce human-carnivore conflict across diverse social and ecological contexts? And how does the work of collaboratives intersect with the collective action nature of conflict prevention tools? So just to go through some results quickly, and then I'll base these in an example on the ground to bring them a little more context. I'm separating out these enabling factors that help these groups form into 3 different subset groups. First, within program factors, second, social factors, and last, ecological factors, which I won't cover for time. So these within program factors that help these groups form, get going, and maintain their ability to meet as a group are, first of all, a spark for collaboration. You need a reason for people to get together, whether it's wildfire, carnivore conflict, drought, you need something to get people working. An effective community leader is important for convening folks or starting the momentum, and this is most effective when it's a landowner or a livestock producer in these communities in the West. These groups are more effective when they're stakeholder driven and run by collaboration by consensus. And support of a boundary spanning organization. These are groups that help bring in knowledge from other areas that may help a specific community, effective facilitation. And this is a really important point. Early wins create cascading successes. If you bring a group together, form a document, have a quick win, get a program running off the ground, it kind of builds this trust and builds this ability to tackle bigger and more daunting problems. And so this brings us to social factors. Trust and social capital are both an input and an outcome to these groups. You need trust, whether it's with agencies, whether it's with nonprofits or amongst landowners within the community, to be able to come together in order to work towards challenges, to addressing challenges on the landscape. And once they come together as a group and start having these cascading successes, start addressing some of these challenges, trust and social capital are built as a result of this as well, and they can start moving towards more challenging issues. This builds collective efficacy or the ability or the group's ability to think they can tackle bigger and bigger issues. So to ground this in reality, I'm going to walk you through the formation of a collaborative group called the Rocky Mountain Front Ranchlands Group that I helped to support along with my boss, Alex Few, in my role with Western Landowners Alliance as a boundary spanning organization. And so every collaborative needs a spark. In the case of the Rocky Mountain Front Ranchlands Group, grizzly bears are an increasing concern as they move from glacier out onto the prairie. This is in northeastern Montana on the Rocky Mountain Front. To give you a picture of the density of grizzly in this region, a sheep rancher had 13 bears on his property at once, reported by Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. It's dense bear country now. This region had heavy conflict and fewer resources than other landscapes in southwestern Montana. But despite this, there's a history of failed collaboratives in this region. So this spark came for this collaborative when some agency folks who weren't well liked were transitioned out for others, bringing some fresh life into the area. Plus, there's a meeting hosted by Western Landowners Alliance in Heart of the Rockies that brought in Jeff Bechtel from just across the border, who runs the Wallerton Biosphere Reserve, who had been successful in organizing a conflict reduction program. Also, there needs to be a charismatic and dedicated leader. And in that leader is Trina Jo Bradley. Collaboratives are most effective when they're landowner driven, but this requires vast input, effort, and time from landowners. Trina Jo Bradley, who's a cattle rancher, is charismatic, connected, and motivated. And she's worked largely for free in the last 3 years to start up a group that could help her community reduce conflicts with wildlife. Trina knows her community well, but like her community, she struggles with when to bring in people from outside or when to integrate folks into conversation. This is difficult because her community is a bit distrusting. But through her own experience, Trina has become more open to collaboration and the benefits it may bring people on the front. And supporting effective conflict prevention at community levels looks like supporting these individuals who have a lot of trouble cobbling together funding. So once the group has had some momentum, we just get to like nitty gritty of this process. We conduct a stakeholder analysis, did 15 interviews with stakeholders throughout the area to see who to keep involved, to keep on the fringes, what have you. And once there are a few meetings, we jump right into setting that common vision for the group, as well as goals and objectives to shoot off the collaborative towards a mutually agreed upon body of work. So these collaboratives and conflict reduction programs don't appear out of nowhere. Collaboration takes practice. And collaboration around carnivore management can be difficult. So the Blackfoot Challenge had been in existence for almost 10 years before their wildlife program started, just as an example. Trina's practice came from engaging in the Grizzly Bear Advisory Council and also participating in the Conflict Reduction Consortium, which is a group of researchers, landowners, wildlife agency representatives, and nonprofit representatives who all come together to figure out solutions to carnivore conflict in the West. I see a lot of these folks in this room right now. Yeah, and also what's important was a boundary spanning organization to starting these collaborative groups. These are the organizations, once again, that connect landowners with resources from other communities and funding. And in this sense, Western Landowners Alliance was the boundary spanning organization. So in any collaborative, quick wins create cascading successes that culminate in actions that may seem unachievable at first. The first win for this group were meeting monthly, where they brought in speakers to talk about the state of the front and share information on the use of guard dogs to reduce conflicts. This momentum has moved towards hiring range riders that I'll cover in more detail shortly. So I'm going to go back to the results real quick and talk about some of these collective factors a little more deeply. So talking more about social norms or these group level influences on folks. Ranchers and program managers view that implementation of a specific conflict prevention tool or practice as not only affecting them, but their neighbors as well. And also they think about how their neighbors will perceive them if they use a specific tool. Also, something I found is there's 3 different ways that some of these ideas about different practices spread through communities. First, expert to collaborative. That can be a wildlife management agency, that can be a boundary spanning organizations talking with a collaborative group to share that technical knowledge. There's also thought leader dissemination. Folks like Trina Jo Bradley reaching out to people in their community to share what works, what doesn't, what they've heard from other communities. Then there's peer-to-peer dissemination, which is a really strong, effective way for folks in the community to share whether it's over the fence, whether it's over a beer, or during a local gathering. And this is really the way things spread in communities is this peer-to-peer learning. But in some circumstances, folks can be socially ostracized for being at the very cutting edge of a lot of these practices. One program manager shared, "We had some of our landowners who are participating in range rider programs, being called wolf lovers or wolf kissers by their neighbors. In some communities, that's not seen as a positive thing, and that's uncomfortable." And these are small communities, and that's uncomfortable, really uncomfortable position. If their kids start getting picked on at school, all that stuff has real consequences. So any innovation begins as a departure from social norms within a community. Early adopters may use a conflict prevention practice, but if a majority of folks in the community are not using it, it's hard for that to spread and diffuse through the community. And you get this chasm right there where an innovation stops. In the context of collaboratives, the spiral of silence is broken by thought leaders modeling acceptance of conflict prevention tools to those within their social network. Within the bounded network of a collaborative group, this injunctive norm that tells people what is now acceptable breaks down barriers to peer-to-peer interaction, important for landowners to share what tools are working, as well as successes with other community members, which helps to increase implementation in the group. So when a majority of landowners use such practices as carcass collection, this creates a new descriptive norm that supports their use in practice, which helps it diffuse through the community more quickly. So the bounded network of a collaborative group and associated ranchers can offer a smaller subpopulation where an innovation that has associated stigma can be accepted within that subpopulation, creating a new descriptive norm or power of the majority on affecting others' actions. Remember that example of most of you standing up, the rest of the people will be like, hey, I should probably stand up too. So my research demonstrates that by creating a bounded network where conversations around conflict prevention and focused community-based programming, you can cross that chasm. And one of the important early steps to this is supporting early innovators and thought leaders in communities. And one of the ways we can do this too is by working through boundary spanning organizations. And these are groups like Western Landowners Alliance, also Heart of the Rockies, People and Carnivores Working Circle, that can increase this network and help geographically isolated communities share information to increase the size of that bounded network and help exchange knowledge and break down the spiral of silence more quickly in other communities to help folks learn from one another. So in the Rocky Mountain front, this is a closed community, once again, that was distrustful of outsiders and agencies. Trina went against norms to begin collaborating with and working with nonprofits and with agencies to find a way to lift her community's voice in this equation. And building from their quick wins, they started a range rider program that works across boundaries of public and private lands, and that has been funded by the Livestock Loss Board, one of the positions, other positions unfunded. So I heard a story from her recently too, that to talk about the spiral of silence. She had some neighbors that were like, no way, I don't want a range rider, I don't want to get this outside funding. And then she worked with 2 or 3 landowners to implement this range rider program. Just this year, those other neighbors who didn't want it, they came over and they're like, hey, could I get a range rider? This sounds pretty cool. So with an overly complicated figure, just to summarize everything, through this research, we find that collective factors, including norms, collective efficacy, and diffusion behaviors are crucial drivers of the formation of collaborative groups and whether conflict prevention practices are implemented at community scales. Collaborative groups help with the implementation of conflict prevention at community scales twofold, because they act as a bounded network to overcome social norms that may go against the use of conflict prevention tools, and also help to coordinate their implementation across the landscape to reduce spillover effects and increase the collective benefits of using some of these conflict prevention tools. So given our findings, we suggest that more attention should be paid to the collective nature of implementing conflict prevention tools to both help ideas spread in communities and make sure they're supporting collective rather than individual benefits. Also, efforts should be made to build peer-to-peer networks within and across communities. Lastly, there needs to be durable funding mechanism for coordinators of place-based collaborative groups. Every single one of these groups cobbles together funding every single year for these, whether it's for the time of the convener or to pay for these practices themselves. These need to be implemented in perpetuity, and we need better funding sources, whether it's federal, state, or through nonprofits to be able to support these. That's it. Thank you.
Excellent talk, Matt. The power of collaboration backed by science. Don't forget, the groups and literature that Matt mentioned in his talk and the PowerPoint he gave are available in the show notes. Thanks to Louis Wertz for recording the presentation and editing this episode. And thank you to Judy Hunter and Debbie Hinchcliffe with the International Wolf Center for welcoming our team to the Wolf Symposium with open arms. There's another reason we were there. We were promoting our newest podcast, Working Wild University, or Working Wild U for short. Season 1 explores wolves in the West. Listen to the trailer at workingwild.us or wherever you listen. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.